Welcome to High Growth Matters, an open comp podcast for influential players in the pre-IPO ecosystem. This show shares insider knowledge about building a badass business, and the expert conversation you're about to hear will cover everything you need to know about hiring and retention, fundraising, leadership, diversity, and more. Let's get to it. Welcome, listeners. We are excited to record a new podcast today for you. My name is Caitlin Allen, the VP of Marketing at OpenComp, and I'm one of your co-hosts.
And this is Nancy Connery, your other co-host and co-founder of OpenComp and principal at Connery Consulting. Thank you for joining us today. And John, thank you for partnering with us on this podcast.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So today we are going to explore how passion and process have guided John Jensen's career as an individual contributor and as a sales executive at global leaders like Alteryx and Informatica, Tableau, as well as his current role as our VP of Strategic and Enterprise Inside Sales at Gong. And specifically, we're going to cover the topics that relate to building sales culture, hiring, career pathways, compensation, and his specific advice for HR business partners. John, thank you for being with us today.
You bet.
So let's get it started. What is one thing most of your coworkers don't know about you?
That's an easy one. I played, I think 6 or 7 years of semi-pro football, and while doing this for a living. So that's why it's called semi-pro. You don't get paid. Practice 11 o'clock at night at Stanford University. This is in San Francisco. A lot of time and effort. You have like 100 people come to the games just for the passion. So I did that while being a VP of sales for a services company at the time.
Impressive. I think that shows your grit.
Yeah.
Thank you. Or insanity, maybe a little bit of both.
Maybe a little bit of both, but I think both are good things.
Yeah.
Thanks, John. In our prep call, you shared your belief that happiness comes from being so good at something that people want to come and learn from you. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I can. There's things in your life that you're naturally good at, or you gravitate to, or maybe they even gravitate to yourself, and you're unconsciously competent. You're good at it, you enjoy it, but you haven't given it deep thought. And there's two pieces that coalesced here. So the first was I was interviewing a young SDR in 2015. I was an enterprise sales leader. At that year, I was tapped to help with the SDR org. No one reported to me, but I was kind of a coach, if you will. And I was interviewing this young woman, and she said to me, she says, "Geez, I hope I don't offend you, but you seem a lot like my dad." I'm like, okay, let me hear it. She goes, "Well, you have this passion, and you're such a good teacher. I can see that." And she goes, "You obviously love to tell people things they should read and absorb and do. Do you mind if I give you something?" I said, "No, I'd love that. Reverse the tables here. Let's go." She goes, "There's a book you need to read. And the title is So Good They Can't Ignore You." And what you've described in the interview is exactly what my dad talks about all the time. She goes, people your age and older subscribe to a different philosophy. And a lot of people that are in their 50s or older know of what color is your parachute from the 70s and 80s. And that whole premise was, if you love dogs, go open a kennel. If you love numbers, go be an accountant. And the conventional wisdom in that book is challenged by this book, So Good They Can't Ignore You. It says, no, that's not where happiness comes from. Happiness comes really from being so insanely good at something that people gravitate to you and want to soak you in. And that gives you energy, and that gives you passion, and it gives you happiness. And so I went and read this book, and I was like, holy mackerel, this is exactly how I'm wired. Thank God I met that young lady. She went on to be very successful. And that kind of catalyzed how I thought about it. Then, about a year and a half later, my VP of sales calls me on a Friday. I was getting ready to go take a long bike ride, wear off the week. He goes, "JJ, been thinking about you, and it's going to seem like a really weird question, but I want you to take the weekend, and I want you to think about this one question. What makes you happy?" Now, don't answer. I want you to call me on Monday. So I hung up, took a long 30-mile bike ride, and it came to me. I just, boom, there's the answer. As corny as it may be. So I called him back Monday morning. I said, "Barry, the answer is 3 things. Puppies, dogs, the Dallas Cowboys, and helping people." Those are the three things that give me the most joy, other than this week, obviously. And with the terrible loss we had and lost our quarterback, but that was so basic for me. And then the next day, I knew I was being promoted to VP of Sales, and they were moving to New York to fix a problem office, and the rest was history.
What a
that
great
was when I kind of, I was in my mid 40s at that point, and I was like, wow, I'm like 45, and I finally understand what makes me tick. Wow, who knew? So.
What an awesome story! I think that's so. I like the ability that it has to couple the personal emotional with the professional productive. That's truly unusual.
Yeah.
Donna, I looked at your LinkedIn profile before we spoke today, and there were so many reviews on it that for me it really underscored that you've done a fairly decent job of living out that belief that living happy is.
I was doing it without knowing it, though. That was what's kind of cool. And the first sales training class I ever took at age 23, right out of college, was taught by a gentleman. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us, but he was like 80 at the time, and no one took him seriously because he was older. And the minute he started speaking, we were mesmerized. And he talked about that. He talked about that conscious competency. When you get to the point where you know why you're good at something, you will have really arrived in your career. And some of you, it may come 10 years from now, some of you 20 years from now. But he goes, I hope for all of you that point comes where you're really good, you recognize me really good, but you understand why. Then you're deadly.
Sure. Now, let's talk about how that gets applied then, because obviously you've been good at that too. And we'll maybe touch on several different topics across the employee life cycle and start with culture. What are the 4 core values that you use to build teams with that main one in mind?
Yeah, I love talking about this. I remember you and I talked about this in the pre-call. I have to give credit to Tom McCory, if he's out there, Tom McCory at Encorta Systems. He and I ran a team together at Alteryx, and it was a really interesting team. It was what we called inside enterprise or emerging enterprise. These were not SDRs, BDRs. They were commercial mid-market salespeople that just frankly weren't quite ready to be an enterprise seller. Certainly not an outside seller. But they'd outgrown where they were. Even some SDRs and BDRs had outgrown where they were. But they just weren't ready to be full-fledged strat reps or enterprise reps. So we created this kind of middle tier between those two worlds called Inside Emerging Enterprise. And we sat down and said, like, we're wired the same way. We always joke we're brothers from another mother. How can we inspire people around the things we believe? And one, make sure we only bring people in to believe the same things. And two, propagate and help those values grow to create our own culture within a good culture already. And they're as follows. First is discipline. Simply stated, discipline is a word that can it's a double-edged sword. It can seem totalitarian and kind of heavy-handed, or it can seem inspirational. When we say discipline, we do not mean do what I tell you to do. Discipline is hey, I'm going to eat the frog first. I'm going to do the hardest thing every day. For me, it's cold calling. I'm going to get my cold calling out of the way in the morning. If it's writing, I'm going to do my writing earlier in the day. The hardest thing for you personally is what you need to do first. For myself personally, it's getting up in the morning and working out. But we have to find a way to have the discipline to eat the frog. The second is accountability. And this is another thing that's a double-edged sword. It can sound heavy-handed and self-serving, or it can be inspirational. Accountability to yourself. Not to me, not to Tom, not to your leadership team, not to your pod leader, to yourself. Be accountable. Do what you say you're going to do. It's not the same as discipline. And then the third thing is respect. This is really important. Again, double-sided. It could be negative. You should respect me. No, it's not about respecting your leadership, although we hope you do. You should. It's about respecting the profession of selling with the accent aigu on profession, not the job selling. Personally, I am remiss to hire anybody that looks at this as a job and wants a job. And I really, really, really get my hackles raised when I'm interviewing people that don't think of this as a profession. They think of it as a way station or a point in time. And then that is all anchored by the most important cultural value of all. And this is a little too touchy-feely for some people. And if it is, they're not going to work in my org because they're going to hate me. Love. Love each other. Love what you do. Love the profession of selling. Love the grind. Love the studying. Love the extra things you need to put in to be great. If you don't love those things, and I know some people on this call probably don't know a lot about professional football, but Tom Brady embodies love more than anyone you've ever seen. He loves the grind. He loves his teammates. He loves competing. And that's what we want in the org, wherever it is, whether it's at Alteryx or Gong or Tableau or Unica or any of the places I've been. That's one of the ingredients I've seen. And we're now in a cultural time thanks to COVID. COVID massively accelerated a lot of feelings in corporate America. It's okay now to talk about your feelings. It's okay now to talk about mental health. And you know what? Love is missing in too many parts of the world, and it's definitely missing in the sales profession.
No doubt that you have built some tremendous organizations along the way with those outstanding core values. With that in mind, I want to ask a question about your hiring process. You said that Gong's talent acquisition team is the best that you've ever worked with.
Yeah.
What kind of hiring process did you follow, and how did you build the best team?
Yeah, very good question. And I want to accent that. It is so true. It's not on my resume because it was a hot 6 months of my life, but I actually was the VP of operations for a retained search firm in Silicon Valley called Peoplescape, which is in San Jose. And we were the first ever online portal for hiring. Now Korn Ferry, Spencer Stewart, Hypergrowth Struggles all have an online component like Future Step and Leaders Online. We were the first in that category. And so I know a thing or two about hiring. I am surrounded by a talent team that forgot more than I know. And one of the things I love, and it's a not easy task to get a job at Gong. I mean, Gong has its own cultural values, 8 of them. They're phenomenal. One of them is no sugar. They really believe in giving each other the no sugar, but in a nice way, professionally. We do the same thing in the interview process. We have a 5-step interview process. It starts with a really thorough screen, which I think almost everyone does that in their talent organizations. But then every hiring manager has a specific purpose in the interview process. Rather than doing 5 interviews the same over and over, which I think a lot of organizations don't mean to do, but they do that. We mix it up. The second interview is an interview where we give the person ahead of time, a week ahead of time, we give them a profile on, and it's the same profile we do, so we have a way to consistently measure it. We give them a profile of a very senior sales leader on LinkedIn and say, write us a prospecting email to this person based on what you can research and find out about them. That tells us how good a writer they are and what bent they're coming from. A lot of people in selling, Nancy, in your organization, you probably have salespeople that you look at and go, man, they just lead with the product. And other people lead with the problem. And some people do a combo platter of the two. I teach to lead with the problem, not the product. Sure. And so the second interview, the hiring manager, by the way, in that second interview is asking, attainment type questions and process questions. Then the second hiring manager interview takes place. That's a discovery call. We do a mock discovery call and about a half an hour of actual interviewing. So now we know how they write. We know roughly how much confidence and moxie and knowledge and capability they have in the discovery process, which is really, really important when you're selling a high-ticket item like Gong. Then the next one is the mindset interview. That's the segment leader. That's myself or Rob Anderson, who I work with. And that's where I'm going after mindset. I'm going after mindset and a little bit of attainment and history and how'd you get where you are. We're all trying to kind of find where we missed something, but we're not being redundant. And then the final interview is with the SVP or CRO. And they will typically really go hard to the hole in this one question. Hey, Caitlin, when things get really hard, tell me about the last 2 or 3 times things got really hard and how'd you handle it? Because we are in hard times, and hard times make great people, but they also greatly affect the people that aren't great.
Yep. No question. You have a great process, and I'm sure it's no surprise that you have an outstanding team as a direct result of that.
Much agreed. Going back to what you said, John, about sales is not a job, it's a career. Yeah. Some of what you just said about the process will, I think, inform this question, your answer to this question, but I'm curious to ask specifically, what is the profile that you hire for? Like, clearly it's alignment with values you uncovered in your hiring process, but if there were a few things that you'd use to describe, what would they be?
Yeah, I'd like to say this. There's the JJ philosophy, and then you also have to work within the organization you're in. So organizationally, Gong believes in hiring. We actually pivoted, we can talk more about it in a minute, from an SDR mindset to an ISR mindset. But we fortunately, and unfortunately in some ways, believe in only hiring people that have been an SDR already.
Can I interrupt real quick?
Yeah.
for the listeners, and let's all make sure we understand what the acronym.
Sure.
SDR is sales development rep. ISR is inside sales rep.
Very right. Correct. Yeah. Thank you for stopping me on that. And there's a difference. SDRs typically are responsible for getting meetings. Every BDR, SDR org has only two ways they can comp an org. Go get meetings or go get sales qualified ops. Earlier stage companies tend to focus on meetings. Later stage companies tend to focus on quality leads. We made that pivot from getting meetings to quality leads, but I'd really love to see us also make the pivot to hiring people that are right out of school, because I can get to them early and I can have a bigger influence on creating habits rather than breaking some bad habits they got from other places, because we're breaking a lot of bad habits, like leading with the product is one of them. It drives me nuts. Lots of little things in language, like I'd love to. Who cares what you love to do? You're a salesperson. Prospects don't care about that. They care about what they love. Just little things, and these bad habits get started, and it's all downhill from there. The profile that we do look for, though, is someone with 1.5 to 2 years SDR experience, maybe a year's SDR experience, because we're going to make them into an ISR. We're going to up-level them. We look for people that are really smart. I'm not looking for the most gregarious person in the room. I've got that covered. We're looking for people that are thoughtful. Now, if they're gregarious, that's great. But we're looking for people that are thoughtful, because selling is not all about being anxious and excited and excitable and, believable and emotional. It's also about being deeply intellectual today and understanding brain science, understanding how the art of persuasion, not to persuade someone to do something you want them to do. It's to persuade them to a different way of thinking that exposes them to gaps and frictions and problems they've got in their org that they're just too busy to acknowledge, or they don't have the skill set or the binoculars or the microscope to see them. Our job is to illuminate. And that's not always, while people buy emotionally, they still have to justify things with fact. And it's important that we find people that understand those two things. And so I love it when someone's got a psychology background. I love it when they've got a good sports background and they're competitive. Some of my best managers and some of my best ISRs played semi-professional sports, or in like really crazy sports like ultimate frisbee, where they tackle the heck out of each other. Not just up there playing golf. That's what's really cool is we look for. I don't mind eclectic. I do look for people kind of an eclectic background, and they're not afraid to kind of let their freak flag fly and say, here's who I am. I'm not afraid. I'm learning who I am at an early age. I'm not afraid to show it. Really like that a lot.
You're reminding me really hardcore of my old boss, Mark Cranny.
Oh, yeah?
Yes. He looked for leaders of team sports, because he liked looking for someone who was collaborative but could also be a leader. Totally. And it was a profile that I'd never actually thought of applying, but it worked over and over.
We don't use this at Gong per se, but if I were to say that any one organization I've ever worked for in my life that got the hiring profile down, they're now called PTC. They used to be called Parametric Technology Corporation. And it's a CAD/CAM software vendor out of Boston. And I worked there for a short time in my early 20s. And I was overhearing on the way to a sales kickoff, the sales leaders talking first class. I'm in the first row in the back of the bus there. And I heard them talking about the hiring profile. And they were talking about how they wanted people that were good students in school, but not straight A students. And the reasoning was, we want people that know how to have fun and relate to people. They don't want people that nerd out in the library all the time. We want people that got good test scores on the SAT or ACT because they're smart. But we don't want people that spent their whole college career focusing on their grades, because that's not what we're doing here. The other thing they looked for, which was really kind of odd, was they looked for people that were from divorced families, for instance. That seems really controversial and odd. And the reasoning, they explained all the reasoning as they were talking. I was like, wow, it's fascinating. They had industrial psychologists come in. And I'm from a divorced family. Oftentimes people that don't come from a nuclear family are seeking approval. They're seeking something that's missing in their lives. And that is part of the fuel that drives them. And like it or not, there's a lot of psychology in what we do. And there's not any one profile, but understanding how to go after people and how they're wired and what they care about, and what they're striving for in their lives, and at that point in their life, is something I think you have to take into account. We hired a young man recently who really didn't ever see himself as an SDR or BDR type. He wanted to own a restaurant. He came from a family that was a culinary background and hospitality background. And due to 2008 and other factors, they lost some of their businesses. And then he went and started to try a restaurant during COVID. That didn't work so great. Now he's in the SDR role, and he's a gritty, smart young man who wants to be successful. And those are great examples of people that can really help your org. And then they find out they love selling. That might be the path they take the rest of their life. Maybe not, but in most cases, yes.
Yeah, I think this really validates the idea that there's a lot more than the resume, and to take the time to understand people's stories and the reason that people have taken the path that he or she has taken is very important. In that same vein, looking at education and background and what is the story? Why did you pick the university that you might have picked? It might not have been a top university, but the story behind it might show an awful lot of qualities about you that in turn turn into you being a top employee in the field in which you are. So, with that said, what are some of your go-to interview questions? Because it sounds like you have done a great job at really formulating a formula that works in hiring.
I have like a 3-page document that we work from, but I do
didn't surprise me. But
I try to keep it interesting. For a while there, I was doing 7 to 8 interviews a day, and I found myself feeling like a robot because I kept asking the same questions. That's also how you get a controlled experiment in place. I have a couple favorites, and actually, I got to give some credit. I'm forgetting her name right now, but I did a kind of an information share with the inside sales leader at DocuSign. And we kind of did an information share, and she's like, "Here's my favorite interview question," and I'm like, "It's now in my top 5," and it'd be, "Nancy, love this interview so far. Love what we're talking about. I'm going to ask you kind of an off-the-wall question, and that's, what is Caitlin going to, let's say Caitlin's your leader. What is Caitlin going to miss most about you when you leave?" And you listen to what they say, and they're always going to say cool things, and that's great. Then you go kind of nuclear on that one. Give it some nuclear power. All right, Nancy, I'm going to go to the other side of the coin. What will Caitlin miss least about you? Now, why do we ask that? Self-awareness. One of the most important things that I have learned, especially this year, hiring so many people. I think we've hired 35, 40 people over a short period of time. There are people that come with not the level of self-awareness you need. And that's a lot of calories sometimes to fix that. And so it's important to get that out in the open. Another one I love to ask, Caitlin, straight up, why sales? Nancy, you want to talk about stories? That gets stories flowing. I mean, my own story there is fun if everyone wants to hear it. But why sales? You find out so much stuff you'd never find out asking about their attainment and their sales process and all that baloney. Another one is, Nancy, you have 2 choices. You could be the top performer on the team, called a team of 12, making the most money possible, breaking the comp plan, kind of on your own. Or you can be a top performer, not the top performer. So you're in the upper 20%, making a good living, deeply collaborative with your teammates. Which appeals to you most and why? This also came from the lady at DocuSign. She goes, there's a science behind asking this. Most people that we're hiring into the workforce today, let's call them 30 years old and younger, they are not as money motivated as we might have been earlier in our career. They say they are sometimes, but actions speak louder than the words. And she said that she'd done a controlled experiment over 3 different companies and looked at when people answer, it's all about the money and I want to be number one, 10% of that 100% of people that say that actually meant it and become top performers and are chasing the dollar and trying to really make money. It's really more about collaboration and making a fair living and enjoying what you're doing. Like, that is counter to what was like in 1991 when I got to school. It was like, let me step over you to get $1. And that's really kind of, going by the wayside a little bit culturally as a society.
Yeah, speaks about the evolution of the workforce very much.
For sure.
Yeah.
Another question I like to ask is, Caitlin, how do you like to be coached? Now, if it's someone, and there's a lot of women too that love football, if we end up talking about football or sports in any way, I won't simply bring it up unless they brought it up. But if we go down the sports route, my favorite question to ask is, Caitlin, if you were to name any current or past NFL or college coach, who would you want to play for and why? You're finding out when someone can tell you, I like to be coached hard. I want this, and this. Or I like, I'm more of an auditory learner, or I need to do whatever they say. When they actually identify with a coaching style that everyone knows, it tells you how true to themselves they are or how much they're BSing you. Like when someone tells me, I can see they're pretty disciplined, and then I say, who would you want to play for? And they say, Bill Belichick. And I say, why? Well, he's probably the nicest guy in the world, but it's about discipline and a process to just get the job done. I know they mean it. But if I see a bunch of behavior in their past that's inconsistent with that kind of discipline, it sounds like a platitude.
Interesting. Well, unfortunately, if you had asked me that question, the interview would be over because I know nothing about football.
That's okay. That's why I don't go there unless you bring it up.
I do have a double click question for you, though, John. One of the things that I hear a lot from our listeners is how much they care right now about retention, right? Yeah. And career pathways are really big for the part of the workforce we're talking about right now, as well as for retention as a whole. Yeah. Particularly this time of year when people are thinking about, potentially moving on and that traditional after the holidays kind of time frame. How do you build career pathways? What does the traditional career pathway look like for SDR to ISR and from there on out? And how do you measure someone's readiness?
Yeah, this is a hard one because everyone's in a hurry and wants to be promoted yesterday. And there's a company out there called the Bridge Group, kind of like the Gartner of SDR land. So for those that are listening who don't know the Bridge Group, great group of people, have helped me a lot. They have a book called the SDR Handbook. And they talk about kind of the basics. If you've never been an SDR manager before or built an SDR org, it's pretty elementary, but it's really good. And also for an old vet like me, I learned some things too. But they talk a lot about that. You have to look at the success rate. A whopping 68% of all SDR, BDR, inside sales types that go to become a full-fledged account executive fail to make quota first year. That's a staggering number. It's an unfair number. And so one of the things we sought to do at Gong this year was completely revamp that whole mindset around SDR, BDR, inside sales, and come up with this inside sales role that wasn't just a little bump in pay and certainly a bump in what we expect you to do. It was also a bump in expectation setting around. Most people go in, they're an inside salesperson for like 9 months, a year, and they expect to fully be promoted to something else. And most orgs fall into that trap and have a process for that, as did Gong. And we call it ticket to play. Once you have your 9 months in, you've done your 12 months, you can go anywhere in the org you want. And say, hey, time out, everybody. That might work in commercial. That might work down market, mid-market. If we're trying to build an enterprise business, that's not going to work because it's too nuanced. It's too serious. It's too different. And people aren't going to learn the skills they need in 8 or 9 months. They're probably going to learn them in like 24 months or 18 months. So we need to have two things. We need to have a very conscious understanding that we don't want to hire people that want to get into marketing or customer success. And this is a stepping stone to that role because they're going to give it the old college try. They're not going to come in fully committed and it's a job. It's not a profession. Selling is a profession. It's such an emotionally draining role. It takes so much brain power earlier in your career, especially when everything's new to you. Every acronym's new. They don't even know how the sales org is structured, let alone in your world, how does compensation work? They don't even understand how organizations are structured from an org perspective. So, there's a lot of teaching going on, and it's naive of the employee and it's naive of the company and the leader to think you're going to just small package that in 9 to 12 months and be successful. So they've found that at 18 months, now it's in the teens, it's like 17% don't make their number. So the path we see is a 24 months or less, 12 months or more path with 3 gates to it, which we're still refining candidly. We've got an ISR role and a senior ISR role where they now go into a closing role and work underneath the tutelage of a strategic AE. I'd like to see us actually threefold that. I'd like to have an ISR or associate ISR, ISR, senior ISR, and make it so there's a bump in pay along the way. there's a bump in responsibilities. And if I could design my own comp plan next year, which I might have a chance to have a little more input, because I kind of got thrown into the fire here at the end of the year. Right now, we've got a salary, and then we've got a variable. And the variable is solely based on how we give you N number of sales accepted opportunities you need to surface. Let's call it 4 or 5 for our purposes per quarter. And if you get there, you get paid per SAO, and then you get paid at the end. What I would love to do too is we need a little instant gratification. I'd love to see us also pay for getting meetings with senior executives that are on a hit list, because the meetings build the sales accepted opportunities. And I think it's challenging sometimes if you're lumpy in enterprise. If I go 6 weeks without getting a meeting, I'm going to go 6 weeks without getting a commission check. So what I'd love to see us do is even that out, not bottom it out, but just even it out. So, maybe 65% of the variable is still for the ultimate goal, get an accepted opportunity. And then also reward people along the way for some breadcrumbs, which we know lead to goodness. That would be ideal. We don't do that today. Right now, it's variable is all the sales accepted opportunities.
Yeah. Great information. I was actually, John, going to ask you, and say that I would be remiss on this podcast for, not bringing up compensation and your philosophy around it. Yeah. You definitely gave us some great tidbits there. Anything else that you would like to add in terms of, how you approach compensation really across the organization, from strategic sales to your SDR teams?
Well, I'll say this. At Gong, I think the compensation is fair and well articulated, but I think it's also during times like these, you can't be afraid to double down. And we're certainly doing a good job of that. And that helps you with retention. And it's not necessarily overpaying for things or paying people for things they don't deserve, but being willing to maybe go a little beyond to really reward the behaviors that you need. And I think a lot of sales orgs, sales leaders for that matter, come up with spiffs and plans and commission percentages and levers and plans that are about the company. And the reps know that. And it's got to be about the rep and the company. It's hard to balance those two things. But it's got to be about kind of an equal seat at the table, still driving to the metrics we need to be a profitable concern and go public if that's what you're trying to do, or get bought if that's what you're trying to do, or just make a profit. I think sometimes you get into a little bit too much of CFO mindset on comp plans. And I think that if I could wave a magic wand and have more say in that than I do today, or even like lead an effort like you guys do to create those models, I think you have to have sales and finance at the table together. Too many of the times, finance is coming up with this FP&A model, this headcount-based model, this whatever, volume-based model, and they're pushing it down the throats of everyone else, and no one else buys into it, but everyone wants to make money, and they don't want to leave the company, so they accept it. And that's not when you get maximum emotional output from people. And let's be fair and honest. Salespeople are emotional creatures more so than most, and you've got to have a comp plan that caters to that.
Yeah, what's coming to mind is it's lived behind a veil of mystery, right? There's been unequal access, and it's been not useful compensation information for most folks. So you hit that point right on the head, and we all care about what we're paid. Right. Sales is intimately connected with comps. I think you make some really good points.
And the nature of people, that old fable, you've got the frog and the scorpion, and the scorpion asks the frog if he'll help him swim across the lake. You ever heard this? And the frog's like, no, you're a scorpion. You're going to bite me and kill me. No, I'm not. You're doing me a favor. I would never do that. So he gets on his back, and they go across the lake, and they get across, and the scorpion stings him and kills him. He goes, you stung me. I'm going to die. He goes, it's in my nature. Couldn't help it. And what you have to do is you have to look at the nature of sales orgs and what motivates salespeople in mass. And you have to take that into mind. You have to take that into account while also balancing the needs of the org from a finance perspective.
Well said. John, this has been fantastic. I'm going to close out with something, just one last question. Our audience is HR listeners, is HR leaders, as you know. What's the one thing you would ask them to remember from all the goodness that you've shared today?
Well, I'll tell you, I work with the best HR leader I've ever had in my life, Melanie Curry here at Gong. And I would say balance the big three. The person, the manager, in the company. She does that better than anyone I've ever worked with. I applaud her all the time. It's a gift. And it's a gift if you can form it as an HR professional and as an org especially. Oh man, you're cooking with gas. That is really hard to do. Because most HR orgs have the reputation of being all about the company. And then maybe in the Silicon Valley and B2B tech companies, it's all about the employee. Okay, whoa. That's overboard too. And then sometimes in some more draconian places like Boston and New York, it's all about the manager. We're going to protect the manager. That's not fair either. Sometimes managers are wrong. You got to really peanut butter spread that across the three, and it's so hard to do, and you got to be equal proportions, 33, 33, 33, and that extra 1%, maybe you throw it in the place that needs it at the time.
Sounds wonderful. Well, thank you again, John. This has been fantastic.
Cool. I enjoyed it.
Thanks, John. Great information for our listeners. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Win top talent while strengthening runway with OpenComp. Thousands of the world's fastest growing companies use our compensation intelligence platform because it offers the most competitive benchmarks and insights available. To learn more, visit app.opencomp.com/signup.